internationally, though, the ambassador to Russia was
Mhm.
his only office held, and then
Well,
the
that was his crowning achievement. Probably, by all accounts, he did an excellent job as ambassador to Russia. He didn't want the job. He really wanted to be ambassador to England, and when that didn't happen, he wanted to be ambassador to France. That didn't happen either. But he was sent to Russia, and what he Russia played a role in preventing England and France from coming into the Civil War on the side of the South. Most historians would say that had England and France got involved in the war on the side of the South, that the South would have won, because the South thought that they could eventually get England into the war because England was dependent on Southern cotton for its industry. And so the South employed a strategy called cotton diplomacy, in which it deliberately withheld cotton from the English market, which actually hurt the South probably more than it did England, because England began to get cotton in other places like Egypt and maybe India. But it was thought by some people that England and maybe France would get involved, and that would, the North had been fighting two-front war. They would have been fighting England on the Canadian border, and England and France on the ocean. And in fact, that almost happened. Lincoln saved the Union once there because, let's see, what was it? The Captain Wilkes, a Union naval captain, stopped a Confederate ship, fired on an English ship on the ocean, and took some Confederate agents who were on board that ship going to England off. And England went so far as to order troops to amass in Canada. And Lincoln, in order to prevent that and prevent war with England, freed those Confederate agents that Captain Wilkes had captured. But Clay convinced Russia to send ships to New York Harbor and San Francisco. And the Tsar, who was Alexander II, I believe, had secret orders sealed that were not to be opened unless English or French ships showed up in New York or San Francisco. And those orders were revealed later on after the war to give the Russian ships the authority to attack English and French ships that might attack the United States. So really, Clay formed some kind of an alliance between Russia and the United States. And he also was instrumental in negotiating the treaty that in which the United States purchased Alaska in what was 1867, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So he was very successful there, and he actually was Lincoln's ambassador in 1861 and 62. Then he came back for a brief time, was made a major general in the Union Army, and he raised troops at the beginning of the Civil War to actually defend the White House and defend the naval depot in Washington, because federal troops weren't available and were late arriving, and Clay raised 300 troops to defend those. And for that, Lincoln gave him a Colt revolver. But he came back from Russia after his first term, was made a major general. He was sent by Lincoln into the South, into Kentucky, to sort of judge the population to see if they would support emancipation. And Clay came back to Lincoln and told him that, yes, he believed that Kentucky would not join the Confederacy if Lincoln emancipated slaves in the rebellious states, not in Kentucky, but in rebellious states. And some people say that's why Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation dealt only with the rebellious states. It didn't free slaves in Kentucky and there were four slave states that remained loyal to the Union: Kentucky, Missouri, Delaware, and Maryland. And the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free the slaves in those states. It only freed the slaves. Well, it actually didn't free a single slave, but it said they were free in the 11 Confederate states. And many people credit Clay's advice to Lincoln with how Lincoln structured that Emancipation Proclamation. But after that, Clay was sent back to Russia in 1862 or so, and he served from 1862 to 1869 as ambassador. He served, I guess, through what the Lincoln and Johnson administrations. And it was interesting. It was while he was in Russia, he apparently had his wife and family accompanied him for a little while. They came back to Kentucky. while there, Clay apparently had an affair with a Russian ballerina and probably fathered a child by her. And that would eventually, I think, play a big role in his divorce from his wife. What was his name? Mary Jane Warfield Clay, I think. And one day, about 1870 or so, a carriage pulled up. There was some kind of event at Whitehall. A carriage pulled up and dropped this young Russian boy off and said, "This is your son from Russia."
Wow.
Well, Clay maintained that he adopted that kid, that he was adopted son, but Mrs. Clay, I don't think liked that. And several years later, they were divorced. And in fact, that divorce was one thing that caused some of Clay's daughters, Laura Clay in particular, to become active in the women's rights movement. She was a prominent person in the women's rights movement. And she, I don't think, liked the way that Mrs. Clay, her mother, was treated in that divorce, because basically her mother didn't get it much of anything.
Yeah.
And she wanted the law changed to make it easier for women to be granted divorces in case Clay sued her, his wife, for abandonment because she moved to Lexington. She wouldn't live with him. The kid arrived. And Laura Clay, I think, and some of Clay's other daughters wanted more liberal divorce laws, and they wanted women to be given custody, or mothers to be given custody of children in divorce cases. And they wanted an equal division of spousal property because Mrs. Clay didn't get much.
Yeah.
And, we think about women's suffrage, but that movement they were involved with involved more than giving women the right to vote. That was part of it.
Yeah.
But it had to do with divorce as much as anything. And it was caused by that kid in Russia being dropped off on the doorstep with, a surprise to everybody.
Yeah. Which he had 8 children? Total, I think, or
10. He had 10, and 6 of them survived. 4 of them died.
Okay.
He had an issue with, I think, blacks in terms of his children too. He accused black servants twice of poisoning children. One of them was that adopted kid from Russia. In fact, Clay killed a young black man named Perry White over that. Perry White's mother was a servant at Whitehall in the 1870s, I guess, when that kid was there. And the kid had some kind of illness. Clay blamed the caretaker for poisoning the kid. And the caretaker was a black man named Perry White's mother. Well, Clay simply dismissed the whole family from Whitehall. And Perry White was mad because of that. And he made a brag that he was going to kill Cassius Clay. And so Clay and Lonnie, the boy, his adopted son from Russia, were riding a horse across some field in Whitehall, and they saw Perry Clay on foot walking across the land. And Cassius simply dismounted, took a gun out of his saddle, and shot and killed Perry White. And he was tried for that, but he was acquitted because he claimed self-defense that Perry White had made brags he was going to kill Cassius Clay, and he got off. But then another time in the maybe 1830s or 40s, I don't remember the date, but a slave at Whitehall named Emily was accused of poisoning one of his, Cassius Clay Jr., a young child who died before reaching adulthood. And Clay, she was charged in court with poisoning this child, and an all-white jury in Lexington found her innocent. But Clay, to get back at her, sent her daughter and her husband, sold them to a plantation down south because he claimed they were vicious slaves, and his father's will demanded they be sold. And some people thought, that was kind of wrong of him to do that, especially when a jury found that, the woman Emily had not poisoned his.
Yeah.
But he apparently had another affair too with a young Indian woman in Mexico.
Oh.
He raised a company of soldiers to fight in the Mexican War. Now, he opposed the Mexican War because he thought it was a war to expand slavery into the West. through getting new territory. But because Mexico had attacked the United States, he sent over Texas. Then he, even though he opposed the war, raised soldiers and served as a captain to go to Mexico. They didn't do much fighting because they were captured themselves. And they were put in prison in Mexico. And now Clay is given credit for saving the life of his men, because apparently the Mexican commander was going to execute the whole company. And Clay said, well, I raised these men. I'm responsible for them being here. If you must kill somebody, execute me. And so the commander thought that was awful brave. And so he allowed them to live. And apparently in Mexico City gave them quite a bit of freedom. And Clay met this young Toltec Indian girl named Lulu. It's spelled, I think, Loolu. And he thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. And apparently she was 18 years old, and he had an affair with her while he was in Mexico City as a prisoner.
Wow.
So he was a ladies' man.
There is, I'm learning a lot more about Cassius Clay than I already knew.
Yeah, he was a ladies' man.
Yeah,
apparently. But it's interesting, and he lived to be 93 or so. He died in, I think, 1905. I think it's July of 1905. And on the night he died, well, he developed gout the last few years of his life, and his bed had to be moved upstairs to a study. And the night he died, it come a big thunderstorm, and there was a statue of Henry Clay in Lexington that lightning struck and cracked.
Oh, wow.
And somebody said that's old Cash on his way out.
Wow.
So, it's kind of interesting to make that comment that he, struck Henry Clay with a bolt of lightning on the way out. But he was an interesting figure. I mean, he was but he there's a lot of misconceptions about him. He never was successful politically the way that he wanted to be in Kentucky, because he really, I think, his whole emancipation plan was designed to create a political coalition of non-slave owning whites in Kentucky and perhaps throughout the South to elect him to higher public office. And he was never able to surmount the race question or the question of race war.
And the support. No one was really, I guess, buying what he was selling.
Yeah. Well, they were more afraid of what might happen if the slaves were set free than who would control them? Would they just do whatever? And one argument that slave owners made to justify slavery was they said, look, if you free slaves, they would say, some slave owners say slavery was a morally corrupt, bad institution. But if you keep slavery, they would argue, you control the black race and you prevent a race war. And that, politicians often create fear in the minds of voters, and our politicians still do that. Yeah. And that's what these Southern slave owners are doing, creating fear. And Clay could never overcome that fear, even though he tried to
present logical
with his
solutions.
That's one reason I think he was modern. Yeah.
That still goes on today for sure. Geez, I'm trying to think of anything else that any other, just stories of Cassius Clay right off the top that we've not mentioned yet.
Well, I'm trying to think. I've got a few notes. Let me look at and see if I've covered everything. Yeah, I think I have. I've covered pretty much everything I've got written down here to talk about. And so said he was an interesting character. Now there's a new book. It may already be out. I don't know, by Ann Marshall about Cassius Clay. And I think Ann Marshall used to be at the University of Kentucky. She's at the University of Mississippi now. And she was, I think, a librarian, and maybe at UK. It seems like I remember her at UK. I'm not sure. But she's got a new book out on Cassius Clay. And she deals, I think, in that book. I haven't read it, but I've read a review of it. And I think she sort of takes pretty much the same view that I take of Clay about, he's a very complex, controversial figure. And he was not the simple abolitionist and opponent of slavery that we think he is, that his opposition to slavery was calculated to win higher public office. And I think that's what he was about.
Yeah.
And, it depends on what you define success. If he didn't get elective office other than 3 terms in the Kentucky House of Representatives, but he was Russia's he was ambassador to Russia, and that was a pretty good office. And he, was credited with helping with influencing Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. He also helped keep England and France out of the war, which
big things.
Most people say it would have been over had England got in, especially.
Yeah, and I guess that's the big thing to take away from Cassius Clay is he very very controversial. Obviously, I mean, going through those stories, he killed
Well,
he killed one, two, multiple people, maybe. uh,
Well, he killed Perry White at
mhm.
least, and he killed Turner Boy.
Yeah,
I don't know if he killed other people or not, but those two. But now Perry White was probably murder.
yeah,
The other boy that attacked Clay first, that
yeah,
was self-defense. And the Sam Brown, he didn't kill Sam Brown, but he disfigured him for life. That was self-defense too, because Brown shot at Clay while Clay was speaking. So, that was certainly self-defense. And Clay was saved because Brown had something like, he was a professional hitman from New Orleans. He had something like 40 fights or 40-some fights and never lost them.
Wow.
And he would, and so, Clay got lucky to survive that bullet hit. He happened to have that. He carried two pistols with him and that Bowie knife, and he wore that Bowie knife in his chest, and that metal scabbard saved him. And he had a big bruise on his chest. That's the only thing saved him from Brown, or he would have been dead most likely, because he probably hit him in the heart. And but he didn't fight. I mean, he tells about having a fight with a slave boy that he grew up with at Claremont when he was young, called George. And he says he outwitted George, but he uses that, to try to illustrate that he didn't think blacks were as intelligent as whites, because he had some racist views, which is, be a good topic for somebody to explore for a doctoral dissertation if they wanted to. Somebody was inclined to do that, but he used that to say that how George is bigger than he was, but George said something to the effect. Clay said something that George didn't like, and they were playing around together, and George said, "You wouldn't say that if you didn't have master and mistress to back you." And Cassius said, "Oh, I would too," and so they agreed to fight. And they went down toward the Kentucky River. And Clay positioned himself on a limestone ledge that dropped down, and George had to get below, and that gave Clay the height advantage, and he was able to defeat George. And he used that as an excuse, saying that that George wasn't as smart as he was, but that was part of his racial views, racism. But again, even many of the abolitionists were very racist at that time. Even though they wanted to enslave, they had racial views we would find appalling today. Certainly.
Yeah.
And Clay was different, but he also one thing I didn't mention, he raised he supported Jose Marti's effort to liberate Cuba in the 1890s, and he raised some money for that, and I don't know what else he did, but he was involved in the Cuban Revolution to some degree as well, and probably led to the Spanish-American War in 1898.
Yeah, well, and that's the fascinating part about him is he you're very involved locally, but he had a hand in some national things. I mean, he had some big plays that most people probably aren't going to know about.
Well, he was nationally known, certainly before the Civil War, and afterwards too, to some degree. Probably more so before than after, but he was not known nationally, internationally, with Russia and Cuba.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how well, I was gonna say small town Kentucky boy making it nationally, but honestly, and from 1800 to if you would say 1860, 70, Kentucky boys had a lot to do with the national scene.
Yeah. Well, Kentucky before the Civil War was one of the most important national states. Yep. It was actually one of the larger states. It was one of the wealthier states. I think Kentucky, even though it was on the winning side of the Civil War, came out of the Civil War far worse than it economically than
Yeah.
it did going
Yep.
in. Kentucky was one of the excuse me, most highly industrial states before the Civil War. I mean, Kentucky made, had Lexington had made a lot of rope. Kentucky made most of the rope that was sold in the nation to Southern cotton planters. They made gunpowder. They made iron. Kentucky was at the beginning of the iron industry. Some of the early iron industry was made in Kentucky. And if I'm not sure, I think the Bessemer process may have been developed in Kentucky initially too.
Yeah.
Uh, so it
Happening.
was very prominent economically, and then the Civil War kind of destroyed
Yeah.
all that. And Kentucky came out, I think, far worse from the Civil War, even though it didn't
Yeah.
leave the
Yeah.
Union. And that's kind of the sad thing about the Civil War's
Yeah.
effect on Kentucky.
Yeah. And I mean, you had Transylvania. You had, it was booming. Um,
Mhm,
Whitehall. You can visit it now. It's still standing. I know
mhm.
they had a few. I mean, um,
Well, they got some artifacts on display there. I think don't they have or they did at one time. I haven't been there in a long time. They had some clothes that was it the ones that Brown wore when Clay attacked him. I think when he attacked Clay
mhm,
and they had to fight.
mhm,
I think they had those there. They had didn't they have the pistol that uh, Lincoln gave Clay,
mhm.
I believe, at one time. And something else too is interesting. They had I can't remember now.
Yeah,
Been so
but
long.
it's I mean, it's in Richmond, what, northern Madison County. I mean, you can go visit there.
Yes.
Um, it's multiple buildings, or I think they might have tore some of them older. I mean, a long time ago, tore some of the older buildings down, but the main house is there.
Yeah. Well, the Whitehall itself, the main mansion was Claremont is inside
Mhm,
Whitehall, and Clay just built around it. I think Claremont was originally 8 rooms.
mhm.
Green Clay's house was 8 rooms, and Cassius built a 44 room,
It's a
adding
lot.
several wings to it, and a lot, yeah. And he had thousands of acres of land, or at least Green Clay did. Now, what Cassius did with all of it, I don't know, but the house fell into disrepair actually for a long time until it was
Mhm.
given to the state, and or I'm not sure it was given to the state. It was eventually given to the state, I think, but it was
Yeah.
restored by a group, and
If you look up online, you'll see a lot of the, on the Library of Congress, a lot of the photos of the before it was restored. I mean, it looked rough. I mean, you know.
what was used as a didn't tenants live in it for a while, and then wasn't it a hay barn or
Yeah,
something for a while?
yeah,
I think they stored hay in it for a while, I
yeah,
believe.
wow. Uh, that's the way it goes.
So certainly, I'm no expert on
Mhm,
Cassius Clay. But I said I wrote that article on him back in the 1980s. Had to refresh my memories. I hadn't dealt with him
mhm,
in years and years and years. But as I said, I've got interested in him because of
yeah.
Berea College. I graduated from Berea College,
That's
and Clay's name is pretty important there, along with John G. Fee. And I was interested in the break between Clay and Fee and why it occurred.
there you go. Well, I mean, and that's just one of those figures that you don't know as much about, but like as I said, plays a big part of
Mhm.
Kentucky history and the nation's history. And
Well, a lot of people consider him a minor figure, but he was actually, I think, more of a major or certainly a
mhm,
mid-major
yeah,
figure.
a-
He wasn't the top, but he should be given more credit
yeah, and
than he's
he owned a
gotten.
lot of businesses too and operated those. I mean, some successful, some not. I'm sure. Um,
Well, that's why I think one reason he wanted to end slavery because he thought it would help his businesses and other
yeah,
businesses too.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, that's a pretty good wrap on, or at least, there's a few books out there about Cassius Clay that you could, get a hold of if you want, and the new book that you mentioned as well. Um, but yeah, I would recommend going and visiting Whitehall.
I don't know what the new book is on, but it would be interesting to. And I believe Anne Marsh was Kentucky connection. I believe she was at the
Yeah,
Library UK
yeah,
many years ago, I think, or some time ago. I've heard the name. I don't know that I know her, but I've heard the name.
yeah. Well, Professor Cantrell, thank you, for joining us again and talking some more Kentucky history.
Well, thank you. I'm more than
Yeah,
happy to do
yeah,
it.
we'll get us
It's
another
enjoyable.
topic, and, you can come on anytime.
Well, let me think. I don't know if I know enough about anything else, but immigrants and those about all I know.
Well,
So,
that's good. That's good. But anyway, yeah, thanks again for joining us, and thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Welcome to the Kentucky History Channel, where we strive to bring you all the Kentucky history content you want and you deserve. Kentucky is a part of all of us, and we plan on covering all the history we can, from Pike County to Fulton County, from Louisville to Harlan. Here on our YouTube channel, you can find many videos dedicated to different events, people, governors, and places in Kentucky. There's something for everybody. While you're here, if you like the channel, hit the subscribe button and the notification button so you get notified anytime new Kentucky history is available. And if you want to support the channel, we have a Patreon page as well, or patreon.com/kyhistorypod. You've probably heard about Daniel Boone, but what about the rest of the frontiersmen who came to Kentucky and settled? That's what we want to bring to the Kentucky History Channel. The stories of the untold, the stories of those forgotten. One thing to expect on our channel is great Kentucky content. Some stories that you've never heard of. The Night Riders, who began in western Kentucky. Bloody Monday, the riots in Louisville. The assassination of Governor Goebel, the only governor ever assassinated in the United States. Stories from all over Kentucky, stories that are unforgettable once you've heard them. You can find out who counties in Kentucky are named after and how your county got started. From beginning to end, we plan to document every county in Kentucky, all 120. Reach out to us on all of our social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And also leave a comment on one of our YouTube videos. You can also check out our podcast episodes. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and many more. We're always seeking to find more Kentucky history so we can bring it to you. The viewers, the listeners, we want all the stories and all the events from Kentucky's great history to be told and shared everywhere.